Evo Morales did a lot of things to try to shield Bolivia from Western influence. I mean, including cutting ties with US-backed institutions like the IMF and World Bank. In 2018, Bolivia also joined China's Belt and Road Initiative. I think a lot of Latin American countries in 2018 joined the Belt and Road Initiative. With today's geopolitical realignment and renewed cooperation, well, Bolivia's renewed cooperation with the IMF, World Bank, and the US, I think very recently was kind of announced that that was happening. What do you think this is going to mean for Bolivia's current path of development?
Well, I think we know what's going to happen because it's something that was already taken place in Bolivian history from the 1980s up until the election of Evo Morales, was the implementation of the neoliberal model, what's called in Bolivia the neoliberal period, in which these organizations like the IMF and World Bank came in and dictated the country's economic policy, dictated, of course, the same recipe they applied to every country, which is privatization of state assets, austerity and social programs, tax relief and tax breaks to big corporate interests. And what was the result? The result was massive increases in poverty. The result was the figure I mentioned earlier. Bolivia arrived at 2005 with two-thirds of its population living below the poverty line, with no real infrastructure to speak of connecting the major hubs of the country. This is the reality, and this is, unfortunately, the path they're going to attempt to replicate. Now, whether they're going to be able to implement all of that will depend on whether Bolivian people are able to organize and fight back. I think it will. I think Bolivia is a country with highly organized social movements, unions, etc., and an enormously rebellious and insurrectionary history and social tradition. And so I think that although the current government has won an election, that doesn't mean they're going to serve their entire term necessarily. I think when these policies become a reality, when we see public services be destroyed, the hospitals and the schools that were built under Evo Morales fall to pieces, when we see the state companies privatized and their revenue that they brought in disappear, which causes public services to fall apart, when that becomes a real reality, I think we'll see Bolivian people rise up and prevent the worst excesses of that. But that is the path they're attempting to take at the moment. And as we see it, the current government is reaching out to these international organizations to bring in loans. The loans come with these conditions. So this is the path they're going down.
Do you think that because it is still part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and I'm assuming there's still development projects ongoing with that, I'm not sure though, do you think that will mitigate any of the effects?
Well, I think with this current government, will attempt to navigate reorientating the country towards the United States while not entirely destroying their ties with China. I mean, every country in Latin America, almost every country in Latin America, their largest trading partner is China, regardless of whether they're a government of the left or a government of the right. I mean, the government in Peru, for example, is a right-wing government, is a neoliberal government. But they, just a year ago, almost exactly now, they built, this enormous, one of the largest ports in Latin America with Chinese investment. Everyone wants to work with China, regardless of ideology. No one wants to cut those ties completely. We'll see what happens in that regard, because now we have, with Trump in the White House, he is now trying to exert pressure on third countries to try and roll back some of those ties. We'll see how successful that is. So far, that hasn't really happened. But I think the government will try to maintain any investment they can from China. What that relationship will depend on is if the United States makes demands of Bolivia to reduce those ties. We'll see. We haven't heard any concrete news about that so far. But if that does take place, then I'm sure the Bolivian government will have to comply because their sponsor is Washington.